Today I'm going to be talking some more about the mother wound. So if you have traumas, relationship issues, attachment issues you want to heal, addictions, any of it, this is the first place and most important place to look. Our patterning that we get from our mother, particularly from the womb till about 6 or 7 years old, is basically just about everything. So stay tuned. Welcome back to my channel. My name is Adam. Today is going to be a continuation of my last video. I'm going to be telling a bit of my story. So if you want to follow along and just see where you can relate in your own way, whether the specifics are the same or very different, the emotions and responses and traumas that we all have underneath are basically the same. Everything's connected to this: money, friendships, business partnerships, all of it. So my mother, when I was in the womb, her father had cancer. And she loved her father more than anything in the world. Now, for like the first 7 months or so, she said she was very hopeful that things would be okay because they were trying different treatments, and it looked like he maybe could get over it or beat it. Now, that still would put her in a very vulnerable state. And as a developing fetus, I would have still been absorbing, like fear and sadness and concern. But what happened was, at about 7 months, 7.5 months, he took a dramatic turn for the worse. And the doctor basically told her that he was going to die, that he would live to see the baby born, and then that was about it. And what happened here is, just imagine, like, if you're in this environment that you're not even a fully formed person yet. The environment is everything. The thoughts of your mother, the vibe of your mother, the emotions of your mother, the belief systems are all going into you, making your body, making your neural network patterns, making your emotional patterns. We're forming in a place where we need to feel very safe in order to have a regulated nervous system going forward in our lives. And all of a sudden, at 7.5 months, boom, there's this enormous crash. And she's suddenly thrown into fear, panic, grief, trauma, sadness. And one of the interesting things is, with the way this manifested in my life, is I used to sit up as when I was about 3 years old in bed and just think about my parents dying, and I would just cry. And I just wouldn't be able to stop crying. And part of that was because I had such an intense experience with her losing her father, and that emotion and that energy, that I had that fear within me. I also have a tendency, and I always have had a tendency, it's something I've worked through mostly, but still have it somewhat, to always assume the loss when I love someone. And it's made it very difficult for me to get close to people, because there's this part of me that's like, well, what's the point? They're just going to die or leave anyway. And that was largely because of me developing while my mother was going through this trauma. And so I would ask you, to see where your mother was while you were in the womb, because this can give you very big clues into some of your ongoing patterns in your life. And I'll get into a little bit later how this actually was chosen by me on a higher dimensional level, because I know my soul history extremely well, and my soul has had that same wound. So I literally chose my mother and this scenario to help bring this wound up, to heal it in this lifetime. Another thing that came from this was I ended up having a very codependent relationship with my mom. It's something we've worked on for many, many years, and basically healed it at this point. But she was extremely overprotective of me, which is common for mothers, especially Jewish mothers. But a large part of that came from her loss with her father. So she was always afraid, she would lose me. So she was extra careful She never wanted me to, I wasn't allowed to play football. She wouldn't let me, go out front by myself till I was like basically 40. I mean, it was pretty, I'm exaggerating a little, but it was pretty drastic. I couldn't walk to school on my own when we lived in a middle class Jewish suburb. It was just a bunch of streets lined with palm trees, and it was just a straight shot down to the school. Like she just couldn't let go. And this led to a lot of frustration and anger on my part at her. But as I've come to understand where that fear came from, it makes it much easier for me to just let go and understand and have compassion. Then when I was born, I got stuck in the birth canal, which was a bit of a nightmare. It took me over a day from the time her water broke. Like, her water broke one night. She didn't go to the hospital. She went to the hospital the following day. It took the whole day until I was finally born. And then when I was born, I got stuck. And birth trauma can have an enormous impact on the rest of your life if you don't clear that too. I was pulled out with basically like a toilet plunger from the top of my head, which set my whole body in a particular way. So my spine never developed correctly. My neck was always like kind of up like this. I had a hard time like tucking my head in. My pelvis didn't align. All of this happened from not coming out in the right manner. And there was also this like trauma fear pattern stuck in me and a difficulty in breathing. And I think it's because when I came out, like I didn't get pushed all the way out. And strangely enough, being stuck has been one of the common themes in my whole life. Part of the reason I got stuck was, I think, because of all the fear and grief and what I knew I was coming into. And the other part was just being a very old soul that didn't fucking want to incarnate on this goddamn planet again. So I was waiting. But another interesting thing that she said is, my mother would always say, the doctor said that her father would live to see the baby born, but not any longer than that. And so she always believed that I waited as long as I could to give her extra time with him. And just knowing kind of multidimensionally and like as far as morphic resonance and like energetic imprints are concerned, like how true is that? It's probably very true. There was some part of me waiting because she wanted me to wait, not consciously, but she just wanted as much time with her father as possible. And then when I was little, without really remembering this or knowing it, I was, inheriting all of her grief and sadness. I remember she used to sing to me when I was a little kid, and I loved it because I love my mother. But sometimes I would just get really sad, and I would feel this sort of sadness and almost want to start crying. And that is what that was. And because of the trauma in the birth, in the womb, and in my birth, and because she went into this major depression after I was born, like deep depression. My dad said he didn't even know what to do. Like, she was very attentive and she loved me very much, but she was loving me through this sort of broken sadness, grief sort of energy. And so there was this, I think, this vibe of like trying to love someone, and she did. It wasn't like an effort to love me, but it was an effort to kind of push through the trauma of the grief and the depression, which all kind of influenced my patterning very, very, very deeply. And it affected my connection with her, because there was kind of this broken, I remember I had this really psychic intuitive person do a clearing on the birth. And she said what happened was, when I came out, because of all the trauma, my connection with my mother was broken. It wasn't, like there's some energetic connection that occurs with the baby that didn't fully form because of the brokenness of the energy field and just the whole dynamic. And that can be healed. I had to go back and do clearings on this, and I've gone back and I've redone my birth. These things make a big difference, but understanding where these patterns come from is so important. And then my mother, right, always had to take care of her mother because my grandma was bipolar and in and out of psych wards and hospitals, and used to, I love my grandma. She passed away. She was a cool woman, but she was just mentally ill. Like back in the days of electroshock therapy, she would threaten my mother, tell her, I want to bang your head into a wall, beat you to a bloody pulp, like really crazy stuff like that. So my mom had to always take care of her mom. And my mom, had to take care of her dad when her dad was sick. And so my mom had this pattern of no one was really there to support her. So she always has been this person that is of service to everyone all the time, but at the expense of herself. So she didn't really know how to receive love. And so she manifested my dad, who loved her. My dad loves my mom, but he was an alcoholic, very detached, very dissociated, and could never really express himself. And when I was little, he was drinking a lot. So she manifested the pattern of someone who couldn't give her or fulfill her emotional needs. Which then, with the brokenness from the womb, the birth trauma, and her pattern imprinting on me, I developed this pattern of feeling like stuck with her, like feeling like I always needed to take care of her. And I always wanted to stop her from being sad and to stop her from being frustrated and to like kind of help her heal. And along with her being overprotective and overly responsible and me inheriting that pattern, I got kind of stuck energetically and subconsciously and had a really difficult time coming into my own and finding my own power, especially as a male. And here's another interesting point. My grandfather, who she loved more than anything, was like this hero. He was like this masculine hero, like a really good man. Gold glove boxer in the Navy, 42-0, never lost a fight. One time they were on a cruise ship. This person fell off overboard. He dove in, saved the person's life. Him and his brother chased down this thief who stole this woman's purse back in like the 40s, 50s in the ghetto, and they were written up in the fucking papers. I mean, this guy was this unbelievably strong, generous man who helped everybody out. But because of the overprotectedness, she would talk about him all the time with this reverence, but I was never really allowed to be like that. I wasn't allowed to fight. I wasn't allowed to like come into my masculinity. And so there was this pattern of like feeling like this hero person out of reach that I wasn't allowed to be, which really only came from her trauma. She wasn't trying to hold me back. She wasn't trying to suppress my masculinity or emasculate me or anything like that at all. She just came from her own wounding. And the interesting thing is my soul chose this because I had a history and many lifetimes of being too masculine, too male, too much of a fighter. And I was trying to refine that in this life. I was afraid that if I brought all my trauma and karma and had like your typical really strong male father and went into the army, like going through everything I went through with my drug addiction and my like many years of healing, like every conceivable thing and ancestral trauma, I would have been dead. I would have OD'd 18 times. I would have ended up in prison. I would have gotten in fights. So I chose all that as part of my own refinement process. And it has consequences. But part of my healing process is to come to understand that these patterns are patterns I chose to learn from, so that I could learn how to heal from them by forgiving them and by understanding them. By understanding that I also had the same kind of pattern as my mother. It was like a divine feminine wound where I didn't know how to receive love. That's why the male part of me went so crazy, because I had this soul wound with the feminine and became too masculine. So I needed to learn how to receive love from the feminine, which my mother was helping me do, but she also kind of showed me the shadow aspect of it, of when someone's too controlling. And the way out of that was to love myself more and more and more and more, and have more compassion for myself and more compassion for my mother. And as I did that, I actually started to come more into my masculinity, as opposed to typically the way people come into their masculinity, which is like take action, fight, conquer fear. And I've had to do that too. Like that's been part of it also. But the main lesson I was learning as a soul was how to give love to myself and how to be easier with myself. And as you love these parts of you, and as you love these wounds, and you question what they're about, and you begin to understand where they came from, and you have compassion for the people who reflected them back to you, that's when you unpick the locks of them and get out. There's a lot more to this story too, but that's just a good beginning for for anyone who's kind of looking at their own traumas and patterns to see like why am I the way that I am, you know? And like for me, it's been very hard for me to manifest relationships. And what would happen is, you know, I'd have a woman come in and I thought was a partner, everything would look like it was going to go really well, and then at the last minute something would happen and boom, it would just blow up in my face. She'd walk off into the sunset with another person right in front of me. And that also in many ways linked back to the birth thing of my grandfather getting sick, right? Because she was hopeful. My mother was hopeful. He was going to be all right. She kept believing they're going to find a treatment. Everything's going to work out. And then kind of at the last minute, the last couple months, boom, crash. Rug pulled out from under her, rug pulled out from under me. And I manifested that pattern in relationship to love, right? Because that's what a romantic partner is. It's like one of the biggest expressions of love in my own life, not having any idea where it came from. And that also is a soul pattern too, of like, you know, having these enormous like visions and dreams for a human life and then being disappointed, going back to when I lost my twin flame and my twin flame went back to source, and the devastation of that on a soul level, the macrocosm, microcosm, right? As above, so below. So I would manifest these, I would be afraid of opening up with women because I was afraid that I would just lose them because of that trauma. I was afraid that they would be too controlling, right? Because that's how my mother, you know, was for a while, not anymore, but that's how it was. And then even though I would take the action and be available and pursue it, at the last minute, something out of nowhere, every fucking time would come in and boom, blow up. Went back to the womb trauma, back to the birth trauma, back to the relationship between me and my mother when I was 0 to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And then the other thing that happened was she, you know, I had this pattern where as a kid, my mother is this wonderful woman. Everyone loved her. I was the kid with like the cool mom, like everyone thought she was this benevolent, generous person, and she was, and she is. But I got yelled at a lot because it was like her trauma from not being able to express herself as a kid to her mother and her father and not having her needs met by my father, you know, in certain ways, just came out at me. And she would just start yelling at me, like, and lecturing me for hours. And it was just her own like wounding that she had never really healed. But it led to this pattern with me where I would go around trying to tell people like what was going on at home, and they'd be like, "Oh, Adam, your mom's so cool." And my mom was cool, but they didn't see the monster. And it led me to think I was crazy. I was like, am I crazy? Like, what did I do? I'm getting in trouble all the time. I didn't do anything. And I just kind of went like, I developed all this extreme doubt and kind of an inability to trust myself because I thought I was nuts, but I wasn't, which is the same thing she got from her mom, because her mom was bipolar and nuts. And so it just imprinted from my grandma to her to me. And I even went back, like my grandma and my great-grandmother's relationship wasn't very good. My great-grandmother's mother was really tough, really strong, but brutal. So there was like kind of a disconnect there, and it just went through the whole lineage. And I signed up for all of it. So the more you understand these things, the more kind of research you do into the patterning that you come from, and the questioning as far as to why you chose this or what benefit it has for you, even though some of it's awful, that's how you unpick the locks and get out of it. And it's perfectly valid to be frustrated and angry and to acknowledge all of that, but to also see where it led you, right? Because for me, it has been a refinement process. It's led me to a different relationship with my masculinity, where I can be strong and directive and convicted, but also like very like soft and sensitive and you know, in touch with my feminine side also. And that was on purpose. And it's led me to have compassion for people who feel helpless. Because I'm a very, you know, I have a pretty strong soul. I'm not someone that's used to like struggling in certain ways. But like all of the sickness that came from this and the weakness and the helplessness led me to this compassion for people, you know, that are kind of at the bottom. Because I know what it's like. So there's all these gifts in the things that we go through. And this is like really the crux of it, is like that relationship with the mother. And there's probably a lot more to talk about for me, but that's a bit. So let me know if you have any comments or if you've had any realizations or breakthroughs about your own story. I have a free energy clearing, if you didn't see the last video, that you can download that will help you clear some of this stuff if you bring the intention into that clearing to work on the mother wound. Please like and subscribe to the channel. Thank you so much. And I look forward to next time, where I will be talking a little bit more about this and more about kind of the collective mother wound and how that relates to masculine, feminine dynamics, and how important it is that we all heal that internally so that we can actually create the new earth or a better world, where we have mature masculine, mature feminine, divine masculine, divine feminine in harmony with each other through doing it internally first. Thank you.